They called it a weed. He called it his retirement plan. Every farmer in the county tried to destroy it. They sprayed it, pulled it from their fields, and treated it like a nuisance. But one farmer made a decision that left everyone speechless. He planted it on purpose. His neighbors laughed. The local agricultural supplier warned he was ruining his land. Even the bank questioned whether he had lost his mind. Yet just a few growing seasons later, the same people who mocked him were lining up outside his farm, hoping to learn the secret behind the most profitable harvest the county had ever seen. What did he know that everyone else missed? And how did a plant everyone called worthless become the key to his future? Welcome to the Harvest Blueprint, where we bring you inspiring farming stories filled with courage, perseverance, innovation, and unforgettable life lessons. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe, like this video, and join our growing community. Now let's begin the incredible fictional story of the farmer who saw opportunity where everyone else saw only weeds. One of the biggest reasons people keep watching is that every time the main character makes progress, something new gets in the way. That's called a setback. By the second week, the rumors had spread far beyond the farmer's fence. Neighbors drove by just to point and laugh. By the second week, the rumors had spread far beyond the farmer's fence. Neighbors drove by just to point and laugh. "He's growing weeds on purpose," one man joked. Another laughed. "At this rate, he'll lose the farm before harvest." Even longtime friends stopped offering advice. They believed he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The pressure only grew worse when the local farm supplier refused to sell him specialized equipment. "I'm sorry," the manager said. "We can't support a project that has no future. You'll only waste your money and hours." Without supplies, the farmer had to improvise. He repaired old tools instead of buying new ones. He collected rainwater when irrigation parts became too expensive. Every evening, after everyone else had gone home, he worked alone beneath the fading sunset, refusing to quit. His family watched the criticism become more personal. People whispered that he had lost his mind. Some even encouraged his wife to convince him to give up before they lost everything. For a moment, doubt crept into his heart. Had everyone else been right? He stood quietly in the middle of the field, surrounded by the very plants everyone called worthless. Then he remembered why he had started. Months earlier, he had discovered something hidden in an old agricultural journal, a forgotten market with growing demand for this remarkable plant. If the information was true, these weeds weren't weeds at all. They were one of the most valuable specialty crops few farmers were willing to grow. But there was no guarantee the journal was right. He could still lose everything. As another truckload of neighbors passed by laughing, he tightened his grip on his shovel, looked across the field, and made a decision. He would ignore the pressure. No matter what anyone said, he would see this harvest through to the very end. But he had no idea that an even bigger challenge was only days away. For weeks, the farmer worked from sunrise until long after sunset. Every seed was planted with hope, and every row represented another step toward proving everyone wrong. Then tiny green shoots finally began to appear. The first crop fails. As spring turned into early summer, the farmer stood at the edge of his field, expecting to see rows of healthy green plants stretching toward the horizon. Instead, he saw patches of weak, yellow seedlings struggling to survive. His heart sank. After weeks of hard work, the first crop was failing. He had planted too late. Because he was new to growing this unusual crop, he had misunderstood the best planting season. A mistake that seemed small at the time was now costing him everything. The neighbors didn't waste any time. They drove past his farm, shaking their heads. "I told you that weed would never make you money," one of them laughed. Another said, "You should have listened before wasting your land." Even the local supplier, who had refused to support his plan, heard the news and simply smiled. To them, this wasn't bad luck. It was proof that they had been right all along. The farmer looked across his struggling field and began to wonder if they were right. His savings were almost gone. The bills were piling up. Every day, the crop looked weaker. For the first time since he planted those seeds, doubt entered his mind. Had he made the biggest mistake of his life? Should he plow everything under and give up before losing even more? That night, he sat alone on the porch, staring at the silent field under the moonlight. He replayed every decision in his mind. Then he remembered why he had started. He hadn't planted this crop because it was easy. He planted it because he believed it had a future that others couldn't see. Instead of quitting, he decided to learn from his mistake. He spent every spare hour studying the crop, talking to experienced growers, and figuring out exactly what had gone wrong. He realized the timing had been wrong, not the idea. But would he get another chance before it was too late? Or had everyone been right from the very beginning? Stay with me, because what happened next surprised the entire community. Just when it seemed the farm was finally beginning to recover, disaster struck again. Dark clouds rolled across the sky late one afternoon. The wind picked up, bending the young plants until they nearly touched the ground. Ethan stood on the porch, watching the horizon with a growing sense of dread. He knew this wasn't an ordinary storm. Within minutes, heavy rain poured down. Powerful winds ripped through the fields, flattening rows of crops that had taken months of hard work to grow. Hail crashed onto the land, tearing leaves from the stalks and leaving the fields scarred. By sunrise, the damage was heartbreaking. Ethan slowly walked through the muddy fields. Every step reminded him of the hours he had spent planting, watering, and believing that this season would finally change everything. Now much of the crop lay broken on the ground. Sarah quietly joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. A few days later, another letter arrived from the bank. The message was short but devastating. Because of the previous poor harvest and the latest storm damage, the farm was now considered a high financial risk. If another season failed, the bank would require Ethan to sell part of his land to cover the debt. That land wasn't just property, it had become his dream, his family's future, and the promise he had made to himself that he would never give up. The pressure became almost unbearable. Some neighbors shook their heads and whispered that the farm was cursed. Others suggested Ethan should sell before losing everything. Even people who had once encouraged him now wondered if it was time to walk away. Late that night, Ethan sat alone in the old barn. He looked at his rough hands, exhausted from months of work that seemed to disappear with every setback. For the first time, doubt crept into his heart. What if everyone had been right? What if all his sacrifices had been for nothing? Then his young son Noah quietly walked into the barn carrying a small lantern. "Dad," he said softly, "you always told me that storms don't last forever." Those simple words pierced through Ethan's fear. He looked back toward the damaged fields and took a deep breath. The crops were hurt, but not all of them were destroyed. As long as something was still growing, there was still hope. He stood up with a new determination. If the storm had taken half the harvest, he would fight twice as hard to save the rest. But time was running out. Could Ethan recover before the bank took his land? Or was this the beginning of the end? Just when it seemed the worst was finally behind him, another obstacle appeared. After months of exhausting work, sleepless nights, and countless setbacks, the fields were finally alive. Healthy green plants stretched across the farm, swaying gently in the wind. For the first time since he had planted what everyone called a worthless weed, the farmer allowed himself to believe his gamble might actually pay off. He carefully harvested the crop, cleaned it, and loaded it onto his old truck. With hope in his heart, he drove from one buyer to another, but everywhere he went, he heard the same answer. "We're not interested. We don't have a market for this. Try somewhere else." One buyer didn't even bother looking at the harvest before closing the door. The farmer drove home in silence. Every mile felt heavier than the last. The bank payment was coming due, bills were piling up, and now he had a barn full of crops that nobody seemed willing to buy. His neighbors noticed the loaded truck returning untouched. Some shook their heads. "We told you this would happen. You grew something nobody wants." Their words hurt, but they weren't the hardest part. That evening, his family gathered around the dinner table. The room was quiet. Everyone knew what was at stake. His wife finally asked the question that had been weighing on all their minds. "What do we do if no one buys it?" The farmer looked out the window toward the fields he had fought so hard to save. Giving up would be easy, but something deep inside told him the story wasn't over yet. Somewhere, someone had to see the value that everyone else had ignored. Question: who will buy his harvest now? Setback number 5. After months of failure, endless work, and disappointment, hope finally appears. A specialty food company hears about the unusual crop and contacts the farmer. They ask for samples, inspect the fields, and seem genuinely impressed. For the first time since he planted what everyone called a worthless weed, someone is willing to pay a premium price. The farmer can hardly believe it. That evening, he tells his family that everything may finally change. The loans could be repaid. The farm could be saved. Years of sacrifice might finally be worth it. But good news has a way of spreading quickly in small farming communities. Within days, another farmer hears about the potential deal. Unlike the main character, this farmer has more land, newer equipment, and far more money. He immediately begins planting the same crop, hoping to flood the market before the first farmer can complete the sale. Soon, rumors spread that buyers will have plenty of choices. The specialty company delays signing any contract. They're comparing suppliers, one representative explains. Those words hit the farmer harder than any storm. He knows he can't compete by growing more. His fields are smaller and he doesn't have the money to expand. Everything he owns is already on the line. For a moment, fear creeps back into his mind. What if someone else takes the opportunity he worked so hard to create? But instead of giving up, he remembers why he started this journey. He didn't just grow a crop. He spent years learning everything about it, how to plant it at the perfect time, how to harvest it without damaging it, and how to produce the highest quality possible. He decides that quality, not quantity, will become his greatest advantage. While others rush to copy his idea, he carefully inspects every plant, removes damaged leaves by hand, and prepares only the very best harvest for the buyer. Now everything depends on one final decision. Will the buyer choose the original farmer who never gave up, or the competitor who arrived at the last minute? Will his hard work still pay off? The harvest was finally ready. After years of setbacks, sleepless nights, failed crops, storms, financial pressure, and constant criticism, the farmer stood at the edge of his field, wondering if all the sacrifice had been worth it. He had no guarantees. Then, one morning, a pickup truck pulled into the farm. A representative from a specialty food company had heard about the unusual crop he was growing. They had been searching for a farmer who could consistently produce high-quality harvests, and word of his dedication had reached them. The buyer carefully inspected the plants, tested their quality, and asked countless questions about how they had been grown. After a long pause, he smiled. "This is exactly what we've been looking for." The buyer offered the farmer a long-term contract at a price far higher than anything he had imagined. For the first time in years, he didn't have to worry about losing the farm. The debt could finally be paid. The equipment could be repaired. His family's future was secure. News spread quickly through the community. The same neighbors who once laughed at him, who called his idea foolish, and who said he was wasting his land, now came back with very different expressions. Instead of mocking him, they asked, "Would you teach us how you did it?" The farmer didn't laugh at them. He didn't remind them of the harsh words they had spoken. Instead, he welcomed them into his fields. He showed them everything he had learned through trial and error. He explained the mistakes he had made, the lessons he had discovered, and why he never gave up when success seemed impossible. Soon more farmers began growing the specialty crop. The entire community benefited. What had once been called a worthless weed became one of the region's most valuable crops. The farmer smiled as he watched others succeed. His greatest reward wasn't proving people wrong. It was proving that persistence, patience, and hard work can change not only one life, but an entire community. Sometimes the biggest opportunities are hidden inside ideas that everyone else ignores. Never let other people's doubts become your limits. Believe in your vision, stay committed through the setbacks, and keep working even when no one else believes in you, because today's impossible dream could become tomorrow's greatest success. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring farming story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never give up. Until next time, keep believing, keep growing, and keep chasing your dreams.